Good morning, everybody. On behalf of our guests and I, we begin this conversation by acknowledging traditional custodians of the lands on which we live, work and create today. And here in Buildcorp's head office, we are meeting on the land of the Gadigal people, the Eora Nation, and pay our respects to their elders past and present, and extend this respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island peoples here today. Welcome to our breakfast conversation this morning in light of International Women's Day, where we are talking about embracing equity. For an organisation that has done so much to change the landscape for women in all of the areas that we work, it may come as a surprise to people new to Buildcorp that this is our first company-wide International Women's Day. For Tony and me, some of the considerations when mounting an event such as this have included things like what's the best time of day to get everybody together, school drop-offs, daylight savings for our colleagues in Queensland. I'm so sorry, they're doing this an hour earlier than all of us. Disruptions to sites when we begin this, to our construction sites. And we observed a number of the largest International Women's Day events, such as the UN Women's Breakfast and the Property Council of Australia's events. Often we'll do breakfasts where 1,500 women turn up. I could never make most of those because often I was doing school drop-off, but what works for some doesn't work for others. But we wanted to host an event that had potential for everybody to think about the world a little differently. We didn't want to have an event where we tried to fix women, or men for that matter. Just something where we lifted everybody. We're also recording today's event to ensure that everybody who wants to hear from these two Australian business people have a chance to do so at a time convenient to them. We welcome any feedback on whether we should start looking at doing an annual International Women's Day event. We're interested in your feedback, so please reach out to any of us and let us know, particularly Tony and I, and any suggestions about how we could improve this. After all, this is one of the values of Buildcorp, continual improvement. Right up front, I want to acknowledge the hard work that's been done behind the scenes to bring today together. You can imagine we're streaming live, we're recording this, we're putting a breakfast on here where we are. To all of our colleagues on sites in our Brisbane and Melbourne offices, to Euroline, we welcome you all. But to pull this together, it couldn't have happened without Narissa, Emily, Claudia, Lachlan, Argo, and Jordan, who's facilitating today for us. Thank you to you all. From all of us, we are very grateful. I have the very great honour of introducing our speakers today, who are both friends of mine. And to be honest with you, I just feel so honoured that we've been able to secure both of them. Imagine how busy these two women are on a day like today, who work in very different sectors to ours, and actually to each other. And it's important that we continue at Buildcorp to look at what good looks like everywhere, outside of construction, in construction, so we can all continue to learn from each other and broaden our own sites. Karen Penrose started her career as a banker and then a chief financial officer before venturing out to be a non-executive director. She currently serves on the boards of Cochlear, Ramsay Healthcare, some of you have worked on Ramsay projects, a Buildcorp client, the Bank of Queensland, Estia Aged Care and Rugby Australia, where I've been working with her as the chair, she's working tirelessly actually, as the chair of the Women's Advisory Group, who in February this year announced the contracting of the Buildcorp Wallaroos and the Buildcorp Super W women rugby players to be fully professional by 2025. Edwina McCann is a publisher and editorial director of news, prestige and Condé Nast titles including Vogue, Vogue Living and GQ magazines. And I was just having a conversation with Edwina because she's on the editorial board and part of the leadership team of the Australian newspaper, and we were just talking about the appointment of the very first woman editor there, Michelle Gunn, and how exciting that is for all of us and the changes that are going to be happening there. Edwina has a long history of reputable roles within Australia's media network, including Editor-in-Chief of Vogue Australia for 10 years, and she remains the title's Editorial Director and Publisher. Her expansion to publisher for the News Prestige Network has played an integral part in the digital transformational elements of the Australian newspaper's prestige publishing. But Edwina's life straddles school pickups, Met Gala balls. I hope you're going to ask us something about that, Jordan. But at the heart of this, she's a woman like Karen, trying to understand how to embed both equality and equity everywhere she goes. And I've seen that firsthand, which is one of the reasons I invited both these women. Now, just for those of you wondering the difference between equity and equality, have a look at the slide that's now on your screen for those of you tuning in, and for all of us in the room, have a look to your left, my right. Some of you would have seen this slide. It's pretty popular in social media feeds, and those of you who are here for the Pip Marlowe session in Sydney on leadership, she did share this. So have a look at it. I think it's self-explanatory. Today we're being asked on International Women's Day to embrace equity. And as Karen and Edwina make their seats up with Jordan, think about the theme of International Women's Day and give some thought how in your day-to-day lives you might be able to embrace equity yourself. So I'm now going to hand over to Jordan Sukkar, who will be moderating today's conversation with our special guests. Please join me in welcoming them up to the stage.
Is this on? Excellent. So, thank you very much for joining us all today. And probably just to get started along, just for everyone's benefit in the room, what does a day in the life of Edwina McCann look like? A publisher and editorial director, plus everything else that Josephine mentioned.
Well, at the moment, it looks quite different to the way it's looked for the past 10 years, because I was editor-in-chief of Vogue, so this is actually the first time for quite some time that I've been in Sydney for this period, and I actually forgot how hot it is in the end of February and the beginning of March, or end of February, because this is the time that the international collections are on, so the ready-to-wear shows. So for the past 15 years, I've actually travelled almost 12 weeks a year. And I have twin daughters who are 17 and a stepson who's 16 and 14. So you can imagine that's taken quite, and a crazy dog too, that's taken quite a toll sometimes on our family. So right now it's actually great. I get to go to the gym when I like. I can do trips when I do still have to travel a lot that I can turn around in 2 to 3 days. And I know that might sound funny, people saying, oh, they don't really want to go to Paris for 2 weeks every year at this time of the year. But I mean, I have to say I'm actually enjoying the balance of routine and being able to be there for my twins. I think COVID taught a lot of us actually who have travelled a lot just how much we had missed out on.
Oh, fantastic. And Karen, tell us a little bit about what a NED, or non-executive director, does, for those in the room who may not be familiar.
Sure. So I'm a non-executive director. It means I serve on company boards. Typically my boards, other than Rugby Australia, are listed companies. So my life is out there for you in the annual report, and actually most of what we do is very transparent and available to the public, which makes it quite difficult sometimes for some companies. But I like the transparency. And for me, especially, I started off life, as Josephine said, as a banker, and I was in project finance. Actually worked with a construction company for a short period of time, but most of my life is in numbers. And so for me, February and August, I don't have a life because I'm working on financial statements and working with the CFOs of the business to get the numbers out to the market. So when March comes along, you sort of take a bit of a breath and recalibrate, which is good for the brain. So that's mainly what my life looks like in between board meetings and committee meetings, which is a full-time job because perhaps it's a bit like university. It's not just when you turn up for the tutorials or the lectures, but actually it's the work you do behind the scenes to prepare and to get ready. That's a big part of doing a job well.
Oh, fantastic. So I might start with Edwina. So, as the editor-in-chief of Vogue Australia, you have a powerful platform to shape cultural conversations. What topics or issues are important for you to spotlight in your magazines?
So my favourite bit of this, Jordan hasn't admitted it yet, but he got these questions from Chat GPT. This is the first time that I've actually been interviewed by AI, which is very exciting. So look, Vogue and in fact any media really evolves, right? It evolves with society, and so especially in the fashion industry, fashion is all about the new. It's all about looking forward. So really, I think what we need to highlight is two parts, right? It's one, it's reflecting what the audience is interested in, but it's also about predicting trends and where the world is going. And so whilst people might think that's really all about hemlines, and particularly I'm speaking about Vogue here, actually what I realised, especially with the decline of a lot of magazine media, and Australia was the biggest consumer of magazines in the world per capita, magazines like the Woman's Weekly played an extraordinary role in Australians' women's lives, taught us everything from, how to cook to how to sew once upon a time, and absolutely highlighted female champions and women over the years. And when we saw the decline of that industry, and I was in a very unique position with Vogue where luxury advertising was really good, we were able to digitally transform our audiences, grow social media, grow digital media, start hosting events like Vogue Codes about women in STEM and STEM careers. We were able to evolve. But I felt quite strongly that because we still had a magazine which was still strong, that we had a very important role to play to reflect and tell the stories of Australian women particularly, but Australians and where we were today, and that we also had a leadership role. So for example, Vogue Codes, which I founded, and we now have Vogue Codes in other parts of the world, was really 8 years ago about using the fact that Vogue could make things fashionable for young women to have a conversation with primarily young women about not giving up the sciences and the maths, and to really point out that every career was going to be in some way a tech career in the future. Every industry was going to be touched by technology. And we didn't want women to be left behind because they were giving up STEM subjects. A lot of that came from the fact that I was trying to develop digital products for Vogue, and I couldn't find any female developers. Yet you're trying to develop a product that primarily women are going to use. So you could see that there was a huge skills gap. So really, for me, the content is about what do the audience want, but there is a little element in it about what we believe the audience needs. And I think that's really important for media. Media it's a real privilege to be a media executive and a publisher and an editorial director, and you can guide conversation, and we really do have a responsibility to make sure that those conversations are responsible, that they're balanced, and that we're always focusing or coming back to the truth. And when that we're clearly pointing out what's opinion and what's the truth. And so, for me, it's always been that balance. And then, of course, you also have to be commercial and decide who's actually going to sell your magazine. And so you might, pick Margot Robbie because everybody loves her and she's absolutely going to sell your magazine at Woolworths too. So there's a little bit of, a lot of that actually that goes into it.
And are there any changes you'd still like to see in the industry?
On the fashion industry, there's a lot of change still. I mean, I think Vogue really did go through a real reconciling itself with its past. I mean, obviously, you can talk a lot about, the fashion industry and the responsibility the fashion industry plays in the way women specifically see themselves. And obviously, there was the health initiative that Anna Wintour launched actually before I became editor, but then in 2019 or 18, we had an editorial meeting in Paris, and so Anna is my boss on the Vogue side, and she, outlined the Vogue values and what we all had to agree were going to be the Vogue values that we were all going to sign up to. Actually, given that it was prior to COVID, and particularly prior to the Black Lives Matter movement in America, we were actually fortunate as a brand that we'd already had some really difficult conversations and all literally signed on to what we agreed were going to be the Vogue values. So, I'd like to see a lot more change in the industry. But having said that, I do feel that the industry has changed in very, very positive ways already. And I think there's been a lot of conversation around inclusion and more diversity. And I think particularly in Australia and for Vogue Australia, telling more Indigenous Australian stories. We were really bad at that historically, like really poor history at it. But fortunately, we had a 60th anniversary. So Vogue Australia is the fourth oldest Vogue in the world. It was the UK, the US, France, or then called Paris Vogue, and then Australia, believe it or not, older than the Italians, everything. And yet in that 60 years, when we celebrated that in 2019, I had to really face up to the fact that we'd had a really poor record of telling Indigenous Australian stories. Fortunately, I feel we've addressed that really well. So there's always change. But then with that, there's nuance and getting that balance right. And, Vogue isn't a place where the readers want to come to be made to feel guilty either. They're coming to Vogue because they want to be inspired, and they perhaps, they obviously love fashion and they want to be informed, but they don't want to be made to feel bad either. So it's how you have those conversations in a positive way. That's Vogue's role.
Okay, fantastic. So on to Curran now. So as a leading Australian board director and sitting on the board of some of the biggest businesses in the world, such as one of our clients, actually Ramsay as well, how do you use your position of influence to both support women and amplify their voices?
Well, partly I think experience, but dare I say age or maturity, that I've got a much better voice now. I think perhaps it comes with a bit of confidence. Perhaps I'm getting older and I'm less tolerant, and so when I see things that aren't right, I'm more inclined to call them out quicker. But for me, it's not just about calling it out. You actually have to follow up and do something. And rarely can you do it by yourself. And so it's actually, I think one of the skills a director learns is how to influence and work with your peers. And so that, I think, is a skill that I can bring to help influence change. Separate to business, but the same principles apply. Until recently, I was the president of the Old Barker Community Rugby Club, and I had gone to that oval so many years to watch my son play. And then when I was president, we decided to run a women's sevens team, and all of a sudden I looked at the very same change room and saw that there were only 2 urinals. And it's like, well, why did I not see that before? And how do our girls play if they don't have access to fields and they don't have access to change rooms? Which is all well and good, but of course then you have to try to do something about it. And I was lucky enough with a lot of support from other people to apply for a grant, and we built a new change room. But I guess the point I'm making is we need to see it, we need to have a voice, but we actually need to do something. And that really does sort of mean putting your brain or your body on the line to carry it through. And I think in that respect, it's the influence that you can have to get the support structures. So again, I look at rugby all the time, but we can make change by supporting it, by coming to watch our girls play, which might bring our broadcasters to broadcast more, which might bring our sponsors to it, which then brings greater funding. And especially if we get back to equality and equity, what we're actually trying to do is make the pie bigger for everybody. But sometimes we have to give some people more of a shift to make that happen. So it's a very long-winded way, sorry, Jordan, of explaining that, I certainly try to have a voice, but I really try to put it to good order. I'm not very good at just sitting on the sidelines. I think I need to get in there and help make it happen.
No, great. And might actually continue on with you then. So I guess what advice would you give to young women in traditionally male-dominated fields such as construction, and you're obviously in the Rugby Australia sitting on the board there. So it's quite a traditionally male-dominated arena as well. What advice would you give those women in those industries?
So I'm not sure I'm exactly the right person to ask here. You know, I went to a mainly co-ed public school, and so I played handball in the grounds with the boys. I competed with maths with the boys, and I kind of grew up thinking you could do anything if you were good enough. And so it comes as a bit of a shock sometimes to walk in and understand that perhaps the playing field isn't level. That's not a rugby analogy, by the way. That's a real work one. But again, sometimes that naivety just helps you to think that you can do it. So for me, I think if I had my time again, I'd make a bit more time to build peer relationships. I do think it's true, and even if it is a gender comment, that men are much better at having peer-to-peer informal relationships. They're much better at having a beer at the end of the week. And women typically, rightly or wrongly, juggle a lot of things, and I'm not convinced we make enough time for the peer-to-peer relationships and the informal ones. And so I definitely do a better job at that. And I think too, looking for a mentor, perhaps outside your immediate sphere, is also a really important part to help you evolve your career. I'm sure it's true in business, but I know as a director, I might go for an interview for a board and there'll be a proper process, a really stringent process, but there's an informal network happening behind where people will definitely ask what she liked to work for, you know, does she work as a team member, etc. So I think those things are really important. And the last thing I'd say is, even now sometimes I get a bit reserved about asking someone for help. And even I have to remind myself that if I ask and somebody says no, I'm in no worse position than if I never asked. And yet if they said yes, well then off we go. And so just having the confidence to ask, you'll be surprised how many times people are actually flattered that you've asked and really keen to help. And if they can't, what will often happen is they'll explain why they can't, but help you find another door. So, you know, I think there's a few things there about being confident in yourself, just getting out, giving it a go, but you've definitely got to do the hard work.
Okay, fantastic. So a little bit of a pivot now, and Edwina did let the cat out of the bag a little bit, but we're obviously joined by two of Australia's most successful business women, but just generally business people. So moving now just into a general business sphere, and I did get those first 5 questions we got straight out of ChatGPT. And for those who don't know, ChatGPT is an artificial intelligence platform where you...
For the record, our answers did not come from ChatGPT.
And that they were forewarned, obviously, that was what we were doing. That was what I was doing. So I searched, you know, what would you actually ask a panel on International Women's Day, and then got quite specific into names, and it even mentioned, you know, knew Edwina had children. So it was quite extraordinary and scary. But I did probably want to lead into then a bit of a broader discussion around business and technology generally. So firstly, this is one for both of you, but maybe start with Edwina. What role do you see AI playing in the future of your industry? Fashion, we'll get to Karen on that one after. But then also, do you see your industry actually being disrupted by AI?
I mean, my industry's constantly been disrupted. My whole career has been about disruption, actually, and managing disruption and change, I think. And also, I've actually worked out that really nowadays I've got a tech job, which I never thought would happen. But if I actually think about what I do day to day now, I actually work in media technology, really. And we're having a lot of conversations about AI, about ethics and AI. And in fact, we had a town hall for the whole company of news yesterday, where our head of TDD, so tech design, stood up and actually told everybody, this is what AI is. This is what's coming. We're looking at how to use it, but please download download it on your phone, start asking it questions and start thinking about how it can apply to your role. So at the moment, for example, we do a lot of affiliate marketing content at Vogue. So we tell you that you should buy this white sneaker and hopefully you click through and you buy it, and then we get paid because you bought it from the retailer. So if you think about the ability of AI to do research, just like it's done for you with these questions, it could be a huge time saver. But what we've realised is that it's only as intelligent as the information that's put into it and how it's informed. So there is incredible risk for bias. We also already understand that Google, so we talk about something called search engine optimization, which is when you Google something and ask a question, hopefully we want our Vogue content to come up first, because obviously we've got digital advertising, and that's a digital model and how we make money in digital media. So if you think about how that might disrupt Google's authority in that space, because AI will start recommending, you might say, which sand shoe should I buy, and it decides for whatever reason not to favour Vogue, what Vogue tells you to buy. That could change our whole business model again. That's a really important part of the way we make money now. So that could change everything almost overnight, depending upon, I've had a big meeting with Microsoft recently, and the head of AI of Microsoft is an incredible young woman. She's an AI architect who's actually just been poached to the US, Thasmika. She's incredible. And we're trying to understand how all the big tech companies will play this out with AI and who's going to be dominant, and how we work out how to stay a little bit ahead of it. And then finally, there's the big question, like my twins who are doing year 12 were actually called in yesterday to talk about AI and about cheating and how they're not going to be able to use it. And interestingly, my gorgeous stepson already said to me, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask it to write an essay, and then I'm going to try and memorise it, and I'm going to go in there. And I'm like, oh, gosh. But there is all this question around ethics, and Google will trawl, which it does, content, and it will recognise that AI has written it, that a person has it. I don't know how it does that, but apparently it will. So there's so many things for us to grapple with, not just in media, where I think we've been grappling with this sort of change in technology for a long time, and particularly what's the business model look like post these changes. But every industry is going to have to grapple with this one, because with bias, we've already seen some really terrifying examples. It will further entrench potentially divides between us, because the way it speaks to me will depend upon my search history and what it believes me to believe. So we need to be really careful and remember that AI is created by humans, ultimately. So how we program it and how we learn to interact with it, and we need to stay ahead of it as much as possible with legislation and consideration around ethics. It's vital, because if it gets away from us completely, and I think, to some elements, social media, I think we saw a lot of good that came out of that. We've also seen a lot of bad, particularly I think around politics. So we need to have serious conversations, and we all need to get involved, and we do need to download it, because apparently it took, I think it was TikTok, it took a year to get to 1 million users or something. It took 3 days for ChatGPT to get to 1 million users from launch. So this is moving so fast, and I think we all need to play a role in understanding it, understanding how it will impact our children, our lives, our business places, our politics. I hope that answers your question.
No, very comprehensively. And Karen, anything to add?
Not a lot. No, that's not true. So, for a business, whether it's in Ramsay or even in aged care over time, the way AI can streamline our processes, sift through data, help us be more efficient is enormous. But the point that Edwina makes, amongst others, is how do you stay ahead of this? And I think it's really interesting, even for someone of my age too, that it's really important that we see, but we touch and feel what's actually coming through. And so, if your kids are gaming and you haven't, to have a go, or if you haven't, involved yourself in virtual reality, to make sure that you're trying it. I mean, apart from the fact that some of these things are fun, it's really interesting and important that we understand what the technology is, what it can do, and actually how it might help us do our jobs better, how, to your point, the business models might evolve. And even in simple things like, and I hope you don't think less of me for telling you this, but I had to really encourage myself to listen to podcasts. I'm busy, I do a lot of reading. It was just something else I had to add to my agenda. So I really made time, and I listened to a thing called Fear and Greed, which is a business, and I can do it while I'm putting my makeup on. But it's contemporary and it's good business news. But I listen to Eddie Jones as well. But the point of my story more than anything is there's so much out there. How do we make time for it? But how do we get in the swim so that we're seeing what other people are seeing? Not just my peers, but your peers. How do I lead a business when its customers are listening to different things, using different technologies? And the truth is, just as Edwina says, the technology is written and developed by people. So, for me, it's about how do we use the technology, understand what it might do, and then actually find the brain space to think about what are the implications of that ethically, business model, a bit of fun, lots of things. So it's a really important part, I think, of how we all evolve our, careers. I mean, even talking to you about safety, how do we think about that? How does it play into it? There's lots of places.
No, fantastic. And I guess this is another one for both of you, but how can we use technology and social media, do you think, to then help amplify women's voices, but also create change in this space? Maybe start with Edwina. I
think social media has had an incredibly positive impact on the world in so many ways. Obviously the big example for women was the Me Too movement and the hashtag. That shifted a conversation, dramatically all over the world very, very quickly. I would argue now there's a little bit of recalibration and nuance coming back, which I think is very healthy. I think it like most things, social media can be very, very, very loud and very, very dominant, and it also has allowed for cancel culture. So we need to be really careful with the way we use social media. And I think particularly, for example, with something like TikTok, I think we need to be very mindful of TikTok and the fact that its algorithms are completely opaque, and we really don't understand how or why it's been controlled. But the reality is most of our teenage children will be getting all their news from TikTok. So I think to answer your question, it's really about how can this help us, how can it harm us, and how do we encourage people to behave on all tech channels, all tech platforms, in the way they would behave in real life. I personally believe in digital identity. That probably won't make me popular with a lot of big tech giants. But I fundamentally believe for our democracy, it should just be like having a driver's license, We should have an identity. We should be able to own it. I believe we should own our data.
Is that in the sense of as opposed to being able to post anonymously?
Yeah. I really believe that when you sign up for social channels, ideally people know who you are, and that if you're going to say something on a tech platform where defamation really hasn't been much of an option. The difference between traditional media is that if an opinion writer or a freelance journalist writes something in The Australian, you can sue, if it's defamatory, you can sue that individual and the publication. The difference with tech is that somebody says something on a tech platform and really you are not protected at all by defamation laws. You can't sue that. Well, a few people have tried, but it's pretty unsuccessful because they're not considered a publisher, even though they are publishing user-generated content and they're making money off of that out of advertising. I don't understand why that doesn't make you a publisher.
And they're curating it a bit as well, aren't they?
And they're definitely curating it with...
And banning people.
Exactly, with algorithms and they're directing certain elements of debate, as we've seen recently, around The Voice in particular. And sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not. So I think that what we could do is start to get a bit more involved as citizens and say, well, do we in Australia believe that we should care more about our personal data, that it should be ours to own, even our financial data? You know, people know when you've got a bad credit rating, but when you've got a really good one with your bank, like, trust me, they don't want to hand that over. I mean, you probably know much more about this because you might go shopping around for a mortgage. But what if you owned it on Web3? What if you owned all your data? You know, and I think it's a difficult conversation for us to have, because I think that we've behaved like keyboard warriors, and I think there is a real in part between reality and, you know, what goes on in our digital world, but more so than ever, I think we need to understand that in the end of that, it's about humanity, right? It's about humanity I believe in humanity over identity. It's about the humanity of people. That's what matters. And if we care about that, and if you're doing nothing wrong, why would it be a problem to be identified? I can't understand why people want to be anonymous online, and I can only assume it's so they can do and get away with things that they couldn't go and do and get away with on the street corner.
I think Edwina's answered your question well. I think that the two things I would add is, on the more positive side, social media helps us show people what they can be. You know, positively, we see our athletes post. You know, young people can see good sportsmen and women, and they can see them competing. And those sort of things are really good to get a broader audience to what is possible, not just in sport but in business as well. I think the flip side, and I agree with all of Edwina's comments about identity, but the other part is mental health, because it's still true that people tend to post great things that happen or because they want a comment, but they're not showing the balance of life, which has ups and downs, where we need some inner resilience to continue to get through. And so, you know, acting like adults, teaching people to act in an adult way, to have time out and just make sure that what you're seeing and reading is balanced is to me a really important part of responsibly using social media. But it's here to stay, so it's about how we work with it.
No, fantastic. And I might stick with you for this next one as well. And what actions do you think we can all take in our own lives to support both gender equality and equity, but also support the women around us?
So for me, going back a little bit to what I was commenting on before, it's actually about how do we play a support role. I mean, it's rarely that one person can turn the dial and change things. It's inevitably a community, and it's people that have gone before. And you know, Josephine very kindly mentioned, you know, that Rugby Australia has started a journey toward professionalising our wallaroos by 2025. But the truth is, the work that Buildcorp, Josephine and Tony have led to support the Super W and the wallaroos for years has been enormous. You know, I just kind of got to come in here and give it a bit of a push together with Rugby Australia. But the point of my story is, it's how we support, and so getting in behind it. And you might not be comfortable to be the person who puts up their hand and calls it out, but you may be the person that encourages somebody else or gets the conversation happening. And I think there's a bit of give and take here. I mean, the slide that we had up before between equity and being equitable is actually a challenging slide, because actually, if you remember the slide, the person in the middle sort of had to give up his crate that he was standing on to the person on the right so that everybody could see. Now, in that particular moment, somebody gave something up to move it somewhere else to make it be equitable. And that's a tough conversation to have. But the plan, of course, is that having done that, we end up with more crates, and so the pie is bigger for everybody. But sometimes we have to just push. And so, to answer your question, Jordan, I think it's about, are you prepared to call it out? Are you prepared to support people who call it out? But are you actually prepared to help shift the dial for a period to help get it where it needs to be? And then obviously, in the picture on the slide, the young person needs to grow taller. That's genetics, that's fine. But for all of us in business, we need to invest in ourselves so that we have the skills and we actually do the job and we don't need the support the same way, and it just makes the pie bigger.
Fantastic. That's a very good bit of advice. And I feel like we probably are to the advice part of the morning now. So this is for both of you. What advice do you have today for anyone listening, irrespective of age, gender, religion? What advice do you have from your, both wide and diverse and fantastic business experiences for everyone in the room kind of as they go about their careers?
I'll go. So what I would say is, look, Australia continues to be an extraordinary place to live and work and play sport, huge opportunities. You've got to grab them. You've just got to grab the opportunities. Be confident, try to say yes more times than no, have a go. And the truth is you learn more from your failures than you do from your successes. I'm absolute testament to that. And there will be people to support you, and sometimes you'll be the support person, other times others will. But I think just have a go. You'll be surprised what you can actually do.
I'd agree with that. Australia is an incredible place full of opportunity, and sometimes I think we can be a bit hard on ourselves, so celebrating that's really important. And I would say I've always had a saying, this too will pass, and it's really important to remember on those days when it's hard or you're trying to juggle things or, something terrible's happened. You can go down that rabbit hole and believe and that, it'll never pass, but it does. And it inevitably does get better. Even the bad things, things get better. And I guess the core of that is resilience. That we need to be resilient, and we need to believe that it's going to get better, to be fundamentally optimistic. And I think sometimes that's hard to do, but if you could just say to yourself, this too will pass, and as I've learnt the other day, you have to block this nostril for some reason on your right and breathe deeply into your left. I don't know why yogis say that, but apparently that works. And just calm your nervous system, and it does pass, and things do get better. And in that you find the opportunity and the optimism to move forward.
Now, one last bit of, if you had one final message to leave the room with in terms of creating a more equitable society, what would it be? Might stay with Edwina for this one.
I think it's just about fairness, really, and I think Australians are really fair people. So I think we can do a really good job at this. We just have to remember. We just have to think to ourselves, is that fair? That's it.
Karen.
And the truth is that is the answer. It's about what's fair, and then thinking about what's for the greater good than just me as an individual, so that we do make that pie bigger for everybody. So.
No, fantastic. And that's a pretty good note to end on. So if everyone could please join me in thanking these two powerhouses for joining us today. They're obviously in high demand, so we're very fortunate to have had them join us and impart so much wisdom, and hopefully everyone got a lot out of it. And just wanted to once again thank the team behind today. I think it was Larissa, Emily, Argo, Claudia, Lachlan, George is there, but I don't think he helps out today. But everyone who you can see behind us, if you can please join me in thanking everyone who brought today together.